Hello, here we are in Jerusalem. I'm Harry Rosenberg, and this is Remy Ilona. Remy has traveled here from Nigeria, well, really from Florida. He's studying at the Florida International University, but he comes from Nigeria, from the Igbo tribe, otherwise pronounced Igbo. And Remy's a scholar, was a lawyer in Nigeria, and dropped what he was doing to research the legend or the tradition in his tribe that they actually come from I wouldn't use the word the lost tribes of Israel, but I will, the lost tribes of Israel, from the scattered Israelites from 2,000 plus years ago. Remy has done a lot of research and written a few books on the topic. The Igbo people number, I think, about 40 million people, so we're about to have a conversation, and I think it will get interesting. So you're saying that the Igbo are from the tribes of Israel. Now,
Yes.
are you saying this, or are the people on the ground in Nigeria also saying this?
Every Igbo says that the Igbos came from Israel. The 40 million Igbo people say that they came from Israel. And an opinion poll has been done. Daniel Lees, who earned his PhD studying the Igbos, who worked at the University of Basel and the Tel Aviv University, conducted an opinion poll. He interviewed 500 Igbos, some in Nigeria, some in Europe, some in America, some in Israel, and 497 say that they believe that Igbos came from Israel, and one said that he has had it, but that he doesn't believe. Two said that they don't believe, but they spoke further, and it was clear that why they don't believe is because they have the wrong notion that there are white people and the black people in the world, and they wrongly believe that the people of Israel are white. They didn't know about the existence of the Ethiopian Jews. And they also did not take cognizance of the fact that a lot of Igbos could comfortably fall into the category of white people from their complexions.
I understand. So time out. This is pretty fascinating. You're saying that there's 40 million people in Nigeria who have an identity that they come from the house of Israel, from the people of Israel.
Yeah, who also have oral traditions to back it up, and whose lived experiences are unquestionably Jewish.
Okay, that's great. We'll talk about those customs in a little bit. I'd like to just touch on what you said before about the concept of black and white. Now, you are darker skin complexion, I'm a whiter skin complexion. How is it possible we come from the same people?
You have siblings and I have siblings. And if we take a very, very closer look at the complexions, your sibling doesn't have your complexion, my siblings don't have my complexion. Move these individuals to different parts of the world. Move one to West Africa, where the equator, which is very, very close to the equator. Move the other one to Siberia, especially during the times when the environment was not, when we didn't have the resources to control the environment. Let the individuals depend on nature, whatever they could find. You will see over time the features will start to change. The ones in West Africa will begin to get darker because they won't have air conditioners. They would simply operate in the sun, rely on whatever they could lay hands on. But the ones in the north, with time, the nostrils will start to close, because if they keep on gulping in the very cold air, with time they will freeze to death. So they will start adjust, and over time, the adjustment will enter into the blood. The children will begin to take on the features too that came about as a result of adjustment. We have seen these things happening. When we are younger, we were of course very, very light in complexion. If you take a look here, this part doesn't get exposed to the sun like this part. You see that this place is lighter. Likewise, if you take a picture, if you take a look at my children, they are much more lighter than I am now, but when I was their age, I was lighter than they are now.
I understand your answer. That's certainly how we can understand how humans around the globe have taken on different features. Let's say for the past 2,000 years, though, specifically when we're scattering, from my perspective, I don't find it to be a big deal that you have an ancient family of maybe hundreds of thousands of people scattering to four corners of the earth. And as we know about European Jews as well, they took on women from Europe to marry into the tribes. genetic mixing was almost inevitable with the scattering of the house of Israel. So 2,000 something years later, we shouldn't be surprised that the descendants or the children of these people, which specifically we know the people of Israel weren't pure blood Israelite only, they allowed converts at the time as well. We just don't know who was marrying who at the time of the temples of King Solomon and the second temple, now that they scattered. So for you and I, we don't make that an issue, do we?
It's not very, very important, because what unites us, even from the Torah itself, is the culture.
Right.
It's culture that makes Israel distinct, not biology.
So in a world today of racial tension, so to say, where people are divided by color, that simply doesn't exist between us.
It doesn't, because right from day one, Israel was never one color. Esau and Jacob were twins, but they had different colors. And if you moved on further, you will see that race was certainly not an issue in Israel. It was culture.
If that's the case, then we're giving too much time to this topic. Unfortunately, the world, they're still dealing with this, but we're beyond that, right?
And we will help the world to resolve it.
We'll help the world, but we'll move forward in this conversation right now.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to ask you furthermore. You've said that it's not a simple idea that was planted in your mind that you're from the people of Israel. You have oral tradition, and your entire culture reflects Israelite culture, so to say.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to give an example or one or two. Let me ask you a question first of all before you do. A simple thing, do you circumcise on the 8th day?
Every Igbo is circumcised on the 8th day, and the Igbo people have been circumcising their males on the 8th day since immemorial times. Yeah.
Fascinating. And now you have a word for the Torah or for God in your culture?
The Igbo word or the Igbo phrase for the Igbo culture is omenana. If you translate it to English, what you have is things, commandments you observe in the land.
Well, that's interesting, because when you look at the Torah, a lot of it is based on the actual things that we have to do when we're in the land of Israel.
Yeah. We made sure we retain that, so that because the retention of that helped us to observe the commandments.
And now at the time that the Igbo went into exile, I'm trying to put this into perspective of when this happened so we understand what culture they might have retained and what happened in Israel after they left. So this was around the Babylonian exile, the Igbo were?
Yes. My studies, my probing indicates that we were the group that moved into Egypt, while you were the group that moved into Babylon. We are taken into Babylon.
Right, so historically, this was at the destruction of the first temple before the second temple was built.
Absolutely.
And the Jews, quote unquote, the Judeans, were exiled into Babylon, but not 100% of them went into Babylon. We even know some were left in the land, but a lot of them were exiled south into Africa as well.
Yeah, the Torah says that a large part of them trying to evade Babylon, which came to exact retribution for the killing of Gedaliah, moved into Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from Egypt, you can trace your travels all the way throughout Africa, where you ended up in Nigeria how many years ago?
We have been in Nigeria more than 1,000 years, but I think we moved around, lived around North Africa and other parts of West Africa for at least 1,000 years, and the roots are very, very clear, because life continued in the roots until even modern times.
So here's where I'm going with this. So you left Israel at the time of the Babylonian exile. You were in Africa. So by the time that the Judeans returned to Israel with the second temple with Ezra and Nehemiah, and came back from, not all of them came back, but a large percentage did, they settled the land and they started to codify the law and write down laws of Israel. And eventually, a few hundred years later, they redacted the laws and they made an oral law, and this became what the Jewish law is today. But by the time that was all happening, you were already deep in Africa, lost.
Yeah, but interestingly, to show you that those laws belong to all of Israel, we see those laws that the people that went to Babylon codified in Omenana. Yeah, everything that was codified and called the oral law, the Mishnah, Gemara, and the Talmud, you find them in Omenan as well, which means that the group in Babylon simply wrote it down, while the group that moved into Egypt and moved into the hinterland of Africa continue to live it.
And this is obviously what your books speak about a little bit.
Yeah.
I think on the title of your book you said the largest Jewish diaspora.
The Igbos and Israel, an intercultural study of the largest Jewish diaspora.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. Okay, so we can move on a little bit now. Now, you and I are having this conversation. Does anyone else in the world know about this? I recall, I'd like to bring up, we were at a university together, actually at a scholarly conference where there was professors there from Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, University of Utah, and this conference was specifically designated to talking about the Igbo-Israel connection. We both spoke at this conference. How did you feel about that conference?
That conference was very, very good because it was an opportunity for people in academia to have access to what we call primary sources. Because all along we know that they have not had access to primary sources. They have relied mainly on works done by people that did not know the culture and did not know the history very well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's amazing. I spoke alongside you there, and we addressed something very interestingly. Not only did we make it very clear and understandable that there is a connection with the Igbo tribes and the people of Israel. There's a history and it's real, and we're going to move forward doing something together. I also spoke about something which could be a little controversial, which is the Hebrew Israelite phenomenon in America, where you have descendants of the transatlantic slave trade identifying with being of the children of Israel. Now, can you tell me, in this transatlantic slave trade, was there any Igbo blood?
31% of the African American population is believed to be of Igbo ancestry, because Igbo land suffered more from the slave trade than any other part of Africa. And the Igbos were dumped in places that are presently the United States of America, more than in other parts of the Americas. Mm-hmm. So definitely, a lot of the group identified as African Americans today have Igbo ancestry. The question now is for us to know who and who descended, and a few of them have gone ahead to do their DNA studies. And what we see is that they have Igbo roots. We have T.D. Jakes, we have Forrester Whitaker.
That's very fascinating. I mean, we know that Israel isn't, like we mentioned before, pure blood only. It doesn't have to be you are a direct descendant of the house of Israel to be part of the house of Israel, because the Torah is very clear that people can join the house of Israel. But if the 31% of the slave trade you're saying was made up of Igbo, now today, with all the marrying, everyone marrying each other, we could assume there's Igbo blood scattered throughout the whole African-American diaspora. Is that correct?
We can assume that because with the intermarriage, they were mixed together. It will be very, very difficult to find an African American that does not have Igbo blood today because the group intermarried.
This is mind-blowing. Now, I'd like to go a little deeper. The African American Hebrew Israelite groups, they identify mainly with this movement. Not mainly, but they say they fulfill a lot of the curses in Deuteronomy in the Bible that says when God's going to curse the children of Israel if they don't listen. They identify with being from the house of Israel because of those curses. What we're trying to suggest here maybe is that could be true, very well true. That's not the only reason that they are from the children of Israel. If you follow where they actually came from, there is a clear trace. I say there's no smoke without a fire. Look where the slave ships came from. Look where they came from. There's Hebrew Israelite culture. There's the people of Israel saying that they're right there.
And Olaude Equiano, whom I'm sure some of them may have had access to, spoke about this and wrote about this as far back as the 17th century. This guy was captured at the age of 9 as a slave. He made his way to England, educated himself, bought his freedom. Once he saw the Jews, he said, these are the Igbos. He almost said that these are the Igbos. He compared the traditions, compared the culture, even went as far, I'll be a little bit funny here, he said they wore beards like our ancestors wore their beards.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes, they say it's a recent phenomenon that the people of Israel shave, but hundreds of years ago was not the case.
Everybody's, in Igbo land, everybody's grandfather had beards.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I'd like to continue a little farther. Once we're in controversial topics, maybe to dive a little deeper. Now, Israel and the Igbo people, do we have any history, modern history with each other? I remember you were telling me something about there's a Biafra and some political issues where Israel intervened and stepped in.
Deep history, quite a deep history. From 66 to 70, the Igbos were in real trouble.
1966.
1966 to 1970, the Igbos were in real trouble, and the State of Israel and the world Jewish community helped. There was genocide against the Igbos. People were starving to death. At the end of the day, 3 million starved to death. From our records, the world Jewish community, alongside some other good organizations, contributed a lot of food, and Israeli pilots made sure that the food was flown to the starving Igbos.
Okay.
And it was, why I said that the history was deep was, prior to that, to the terrible problems, the state of Israel and the Igbos had special relationship. From what we learned, the relationship was deep to the extent that Israel had already started setting up a kibbutz in Igbo land before the problems began.
First of all, that's amazing. I'd love to see what happened with that kibbutz, and we should see many more of them.
Yeah.
Now, so you're talking about at a time where Igbo land was considered Biafra, or was once Biafra and was trying to return to Biafra, right?
I'm talking about the period when it became Biafra. Biafra was the name it took up to defend itself against the attacks.
So let's say it was originally called Igbo land.
It was, yeah, that's the name it would be called.
And then you're saying the British came in and they drew some new lines and said, now it's called Nigeria, and we're taking Igbo land and combining it with your neighboring tribes into one nation.
Yes.
Was that a good move? Did that work out?
It created problems, just like it created problems wherever similar things were done in Iraq.
How about here in Israel?
Same thing.
The British came and started drawing lines all over in Afghanistan, where you have the Pashtuns who say they're from the tribes of Israel as well.
Rwanda, wherever you brought peoples together when they didn't necessarily want to be together, it was a time bomb.
So let's go back to this. This created issues for the Igbo people. They were being ruled over by people who weren't from their tribe, who didn't understand, and it wasn't smooth, right?
Yeah, and laws that don't necessarily fit the Igbos are being imposed on the Igbos. For example, our land tenure system is exactly the land tenure system in the Torah. The land belongs to God. And Igbo traditionally does not have the right to sell the land. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if he wants to if he lacks money and wants to alienate land, he calls a family member to loan him some money. But since we are put into a system that is traditionally not ours, what happens now is that every land belongs to the governor. So he can take a land that traditionally belonged to God and do away with it.
Okay, that's interesting. And now this was at a time where you guys wanted to go back to being independent, with the Igbo people being autonomous, ruling over themselves, which is very justifiable. And you created something called Biafra, which separated you from Nigeria. And then all of a sudden, 3 million people were killed? How did that happen?
Pogroms led to the pogroms. Mass killing of Igbos led to the Igbos making the effort to leave Nigeria. They felt that the only way they would be safe was to leave Nigeria. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Nigeria fought against the Igbos and forced the Igbos back into Nigeria. That's what happened.
Okay, so this was something like some sort of mini Holocaust, so to say.
That's what the two chief rabbis of Israel in 1968 called it. They say that Auschwitz is taking place in Biafra.
Okay, so Israel recognized it, and eventually they sent in Air Force to break the blockade.
To help the starving.
And help, okay. Now, we have a beautiful past. Now, what's the future going to look like between the Igbo-Israel relationship? Let me ask you a question. Israel is not the largest place in the world. We do say in the future it will stretch out to inhabit the exiles that return, but you have 40 million Igbo tribal individuals. Are they interested in all picking up, leaving Nigeria and coming to Israel? Or is there going to be a future where there's going to be a coexistence between the two of us, where they remain in Nigeria?
I think that an air corridor will exist, whereby both peoples, the Jews and the Igbos, will freely move and interact as the brothers and sisters that they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the Igbos have territory in Nigeria that is not in contest by anybody. Mm-hmm. All that is needed, all that I believe is necessary is for that territory to become a territory run according to Torah again. Then it's just like Israel.
Of course. And now we were speaking even more specifically. We're working on a project together on the I-Tribe, a social network designed to map out the lost house of Israel. And what we've begun to do, I think we already have 30-something villages or communities mapped out. We have a digital social network where people who are from the tribes of Israel can register their community. Now, if I go to that map today, it shows a shape of Biafra, of all these communities that are registering, logging themselves in. Now, you were mentioning there's something specific that they would require from Israel as far as our intellectual property and technologies go. That was electricity, correct?
Yeah, we need electricity there so that the place will become what it was in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Scholars that wrote about the Igbos in the 60s said that their territory resembled a large workshop.
Okay.
With electricity, everybody will start to work again.
So now that we have this connection, is the first thing we're going to do, which is a rhetorical question, are we going to go now to Igbo land, me as a Jew, and say, well, everyone here, let me see how Jewish or not Jewish you are, maybe make you convert, not convert, give you these laws, etc. We're not really going to go in that direction because that's not the immediate thing that we need to do. Let's say you have an ancient family member that gets lost and you find out where they are, they're okay, and you can send them a message. The first thing you send is not how many times a day are you praying. You say, are you okay? What do you have? What do you need, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So the first thing we're going to do is much more humanitarian, family-oriented union as opposed to a religious unification. That is a de facto byproduct that may happen in the great future ahead when we have world peace. We could sit down over a cup of tea and really talk about God and where I may have strayed, my family, over the exiles, where maybe your family has strayed over the exiles and picked up foreign customs. That's what I call a luxury conversation. But right now you're saying you have 40 million people who need infrastructure and resources, who would like to build up their country, create an identity of Torah on the ground, and do this all hand in hand with Israel in a partnership, correct?
Yeah. And there is from what you described is already in our traditions. When Jacob and the brothers reunited in Egypt, the talk wasn't necessarily about you sold me into slavery, they embraced each other and wept on each other's neck. Mm-hmm. So the way you described it is the best way it should be done. Mm-hmm. Get the people rehabilitated first. Mm-hmm. Give them electricity. Give them a sense of oneness. Embrace them as brothers and let us approach reconnecting back to our God fully, gradually.
Well, between me and you, this is exactly what the biblical prophecy said will happen. When we speak about the borders of Israel spreading, this is not a military conquest where Israel is going to start taking tanks into other people's lands and conquering them. This is going to be nations around the world who are going to start to say, hey, we are a part of this movement, we are a part of this narrative, and we are now going to rejoin it without any middlemen. There's no one that could stop me and you from being friends.
Or brothers.
Yes,
yeah.
Even more so, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, there won't be any interference because Hashem owns the world and he wants his children to come back together, because if his children come back together, the rest of humanity will emulate us and come back together.
Yeah, this is a very exciting future. This means we have what to be optimistic about.
Yeah, it's something also worth fighting for.
Something worth fighting for, spiritually and physically.
Yes.
Not hurting anyone, though.
Of course, not fighting with tanks and guns.
With
and
your
bullets.
energy and your time.
Yes.
And your voice.
Because it's a holy task.
Right. And now on social networks, you see Igbos and Jews starting to interact?
They interact a lot.
That's fascinating. That's one of the pluses of these social networks is, there was a letter written by the students of the Vilna Gaon, a great rabbi in Europe, and they wrote a letter from Tzfat, northern Israel, seeking out the lost tribes. This was about 200 years ago, seeking out the lost tribes. And I believe it went into northern Africa, and they were trying to look from there where they were. Now, what people 200 years ago were trying to do with letters and emissaries and dangerous journeys, you're saying is just happening casually today on social networks. There's just conversation flowing back and forth between these people with a common identity.
Yeah, that is one of the blessings of our time. What our ancestors lacked the resources to do very effectively, but they had the courage, they had the conviction, and they began. Baruch Hashem, we have the resources to do them perfectly now.
That's incredible. So that really concludes what I think we summarized it. Everyone has an attention span today of, I think this is the amount of a goldfish, not to insult anyone, I'm included. So we're going to wrap it up for now. If anyone would like to follow up, we have a website where we're mapping out the tribes of Nigeria, where people can actually go and interact with these communities and help financially donate to bring technology to them and put them on the map. It's itribe.us, itribe.us. And you have books that you're selling. Would you like to just say the name one more time where someone could find on Amazon?
One they call the flagship. They call it the flagship because it's so detailed, it's so comprehensive. It is the Igbos and Israel, an intercultural study of the largest Jewish diaspora. Mm-hmm. Israeli scholars and other Western.
And we actually got an angel came in and just made a swoop.
Israeli scholars and Jewish scholars from the diaspora are studying it because what they find very, very fascinating about the book is that the Igbos that knew no rabbis have traditions that are directly equivalent, that are identical to many of the traditions of the Jews that developed the rabbinic tradition. Is the primary one, but there are 7 others. Among them are wanderings. Israel saw the sea in deep Africa. and many other books that are available also.
Amazing. Well, Remy, put it there.
Thank you.